Welcome back everyone to more NASCAR Heat 4 at Knee Pit Gaming. Today's setup video takes us to Chicagoland Speedway, a track that can easily be run wide open in all three of the major series, and we'll be taking a look at all three from Cup, Xfinity, and Trucks. So let's get started. One of the big changes for the physics in NASCAR Heat 4 is the addition of tire wear. Now, tire wear is going to have a huge effect on the setup that you're running, so it makes sense that we need to, before we get into setup discussion, talk a little bit about the options that I use while I'm testing for these setups. So we'll start off in the options menu under the gameplay tab, and then we're going to scroll down to tire wear and fuel consumption. Normally I do this on 2x. I don't like to go any higher because I do like long green flag runs, but I understand that some of you like to go all the way up to 4x. Player tire wear rate, I like more wear. I like maximum tire wear, so I generally test on more wear and less grip under the grip fall off. So keep that in mind. If you're playing with different settings such as less wear and more grip, then that's going to change the setup that you're going to want to use in the races. So keep that in mind as we're talking about setups. What I'll try to do in each video is let you know the particular settings, because I don't go for maximum tire wear at every track, just where I feel that it is appropriate. And also keep in mind, on the driving tab, there is a setting that you'll need to match up for the AI. So if you want maximum tire wear, then you need to have that on both the player car and the AI car. Or if you're going for less tire wear and more grip, then change that for the AI as well. Before we jump into the setup discussion, let's first talk a little bit about the setups that I'm going to be showing you guys today. We're going to get started with a Cup setup that is pretty stable and should serve as a good baseline for you to operate around. There's room to loosen the car up and gain some more short run speed, and there's also room to tighten up the car if you are someone who uses the more aggressive tire wear and fall off settings. Then as we move into Xfinity and Trucks, I'm going to show you a little bit more aggressive setups, something that will get you a little bit more speed, provided that it's not too loose or too tight for you. Let's get started with the Cup car and the shock settings. Instantly you can see this is the 3.5 setup that I use so often, and that's simply because it worked. Now, if I were going to use some softer springs, particularly in the front of the car, then I'd want to use a little bit more aggressive shock settings to control the rotation and the weight transfer. But because I'm using such stiff springs, particularly in the front of the car, then I can get by with using much softer front and rear shocks. Now, you can certainly be more aggressive here at this track and work just fine. There's really not all that many bumps. There's a few here and there that if you hit them just right can certainly disrupt the car. But overall, shouldn't be too big of an issue, or at least I didn't have much of an issue with it in all of my testing and racing. Moving on to the weight settings, 51% front weight and 54% wedge. The lower front weight number here than what I would typically use, somewhere around 52, 53% front weight, which you can certainly do here to help tighten the car. I wanted to have it a little bit lower because the key to speed at Chicago is a good entry into the corner, since you're running wide open the entirety of the lap. So a little bit lower front weight will help the car to turn on the entry to the corner. And then the wedge of 54% controls the speed of that rotation. I don't want the car to over rotate, because if I get too loose, then I'm going to end up scrubbing off speed, and we don't want that. So increase the wedge a little bit if the car is rotating too much on corner entry. Reduce it some if the car is just simply not rotating enough. Now let's move over to the spring settings. 1,200 pounds left front, 1,100 pounds right front. So a stiffer left front than right front. That is to help the car rotate once again on the entry of the corner. So I've done a lot of things to try to help the entry. If you are too loose on the entry, then simply flip these. As an example, drop down to something like 1,000 or 1,100 on the left front and bump up that right front spring to something like 1,200, and that will tighten up the car, particularly on corner entry, although it will tighten it up overall as well. Moving to the rear of the car, 450 and 500 For the rear springs, only 50 pounds of rear spring split. You can certainly use less here. And for those of you who are more aggressive on the tire wear and fall off settings, then you might want to reduce both rear springs and or reduce the amount of split between the two. Also, if you're looking for more qualifying type speed, short run type speed, then try increasing both rear springs. Maybe try something like 500 and 550, something along those lines, or even more aggressive with the rear springs. That'll help the car to rotate overall and should help you maintain more speed in the short run. But again, be careful about running the right rear off of it over the long term. Tire pressure settings, didn't spend a whole lot of time here. 19 pounds on the left side, 45 and 44 on the right side. You can go a little bit higher than that if you're looking for proper inflation or optimum inflation. I prefer to run just a little bit below that, just because I prefer the feel of a little bit lower tire pressures as opposed to a little bit higher tire pressures. The general idea is the lower the tire pressure you get, the more stable the car will be, the more grip you will have. However, it takes a little bit of speed out of the car in contrast to the comfort you're gaining. So there's a trade-off there. Increase the tire pressures will definitely give you some straight line speed, but will hurt the grip in the corner. So there's always a trade-off there. Moving on to the miscellaneous settings. The camber numbers are similar to what I've done in some recent videos. I wanted to show you the maximum amount of camber for the left front and right front that actually gave me pretty good results. So this doesn't necessarily mean that this is the optimum amount of camber, particularly for those of you who are on more aggressive tire wear and fall off settings, but I did want to show you the maximum. So certainly something on the left front much lower than 5, around 2 or 3 should work just fine. Same thing on the right front. We're at minus 3.5 degrees right now, but you could certainly go down around 2 or 1.5, somewhere in that range, and be just fine. The front sway bar, you notice it is at 1.15. This is similar to what I actually used in previous NASCAR Heat games, and it worked really well. I went back to it here for Chicago because I needed help on the entry. The car was just a little bit too tight if I go up to the 1.315. So I decided to back that down a little bit. That allows the car to rotate a little bit more. But certainly, if you're looking to tighten the car up, it's over-rotating too much, then in addition to some other things that we've looked at with the front weight, wedge, springs, and so on, then you can increase this front sway bar, and that will certainly slow down the rotation and reduce the amount of rotation overall in the car and tighten it up quite nicely. Moving on to the track bar, you can see 11 inches on both the left and the right-hand side. That seemed to work pretty well. If you find that you need a little bit of help getting the car to rotate on entry, then bump up that left side track bar. Running this number up higher will help free the car up on corner entry. If you're looking for help on corner exit, and let's say you need the car to rotate more on corner exit, then simply increase the right side of the track bar. On the other hand, if you are too loose on corner exit, one of your options is to lower the right side track bar. So anything you do to put the left side higher than the right side is generally going to tighten the car up on the exit of the corner, but loosen it on the entry to the corner. Brake bias really not used here. Somewhere between 70 and 75 or so will probably be okay. The only time you might need it is a little bit in traffic, depending on how you prefer to work the throttle pedal. Grill tape is at 50%. This is about as aggressive as I could get with it in combination with the rear end ratio that we're going to see in just a second. So I don't know that you can get by going a lot higher than this without some gearing adjustments. So 50% seems to be pretty good. But of course, this really, unfortunately, doesn't have much, if any, effect on the handling. So you don't have to worry about getting ultra aggressive. But I did want to show you that 50% worked for me. Wheel lock and steering offset are at basically my defaults at this point because they just work for me. And this isn't an area where I want to spend a ton of time. Finally, moving on to the gear settings. So I didn't touch first through fourth here. These are pretty standard ratios for those. But the rear end ratio of 3.25, there's room to increase that a little bit to maybe a 333 because I'm certainly not winding out the RPMs fully and getting close to that rev limiter. So there's room to increase it there, but by running it a little bit lower, you can run a little bit more tape. Again, really doesn't matter for the purposes of this game, but in general, the lower the RPM, the more tape you can run. So here, 325 worked really well, but going a click or two above or below should work just as well. It'll all depend on the balance you're looking for, short run versus long run, and so on. The higher the number you use for the rear end ratio, 333 or 340, that's going to run more RPMs, which is going to generally loosen the car up under power. And of course, since we're running wide open, it's going to loosen the car up overall. But on the other hand, if you drop this down to a 307 or a 310 gear, that's going to drop the RPMs and tighten the car up under throttle. So keep that in mind as you're running laps and making adjustments as to just how many different options you have to adjust the car. That's going to take care of the Cup car. Now let's move to Xfinity. Both Xfinity as well as the trucks are very similar in the setup to what we've already seen in the Cup car, so we're not going to spend a lot of time in either Xfinity or trucks going over the setup. Instead, I want to just take a moment and point out a few things that are different. Of course, the Xfinity and truck setup is a little bit more aggressive toward the speed side of things, so keep that in mind as we're looking at this. If you are using more aggressive tire wear and fall off settings, then you're certainly going to want to tighten up the car for that longer run. First thing I want to point out is under the weight settings, 52% front weight, which is higher than the 51% we were looking at in the Cup cars, and then 55% wedge, also higher than what we saw in Cup. And the reason I increased both of those is because I needed to control the rotation of the car because of what I did in the springs. Now the front springs look the same, 1,200 pounds and 1,100 pounds. However, when you look in the rear springs, that is a very different story. 550 and 600, basically the maximum rear springs that you can run with any sort of a split between left rear and right rear. That is certainly going to help the car to rotate quite a bit more and quite a bit better than using softer rear springs along with the other adjustments we've seen in the car. And then as we move over to the miscellaneous settings, you can see it's virtually identical with the exception of the right side track bar. It's a little bit lower here just to try to get a little bit of grip into the rear of the car on corner exit. The car wants to get a little bit loose, again, because of the springs we're running. So lowering that right side track bar a half inch, a full inch, or whatever will certainly help to get a little bit more grip into the right rear on corner exit. Other than that, everything pretty similar, 333 gear here, but as always, there is room to adjust that. Now, that'll take care of Xfinity. Let's move into the trucks. The truck setup is nearly identical to the Xfinity setup, primarily because the trucks and Xfinity cars drive very close to the same for me. So the same or similar setup can easily be used between them. In fact, the only thing I really want to point out here is under miscellaneous settings, the right side track bar. It's a little bit lower here. We got a full inch of split between the left and the right sides. And again, as we talked about before, that difference is to help the car with grip on corner exit. So I wanted to tighten the car up on exit, so I dropped that right side track bar. Other than that, you're looking at basically an identical setup to Xfinity. So that's going to do it for today. Thank you very much for joining me, and stay tuned for more NASCAR Heat 4.